The divorce papers landed on my kitchen counter with the same casual indifference that Marcus had shown me for the past 5 years of our marriage. I stared at the official letterhead of Jameson and Amp, Associates, one of Atlanta's most expensive law firms, and couldn't help but smile at the irony. My husband had no idea that I personally knew Richard Jameson, that I had been quietly funding his daughter's medical school education for the past 3 years, or that the retainer he was paying for these divorce proceedings was less than what I spent on lunch yesterday. Marcus walked into the kitchen wearing his best suit, the charcoal gray Armani that I had secretly paid for during one of his many financial emergencies, and the smug expression of a man who thought he was about to destroy my world. "I assume you've seen the papers, Patricia," he said, pouring himself coffee from the machine that had been a splurge purchase he'd agonized over for weeks. "My lawyer says this should be straightforward. Irreconcilable differences, 50-50 split of assets, reasonable spousal support while you get back on your feet." I folded the papers carefully and set them beside my own coffee cup, a delicate bone china piece from a set that Marcus believed I'd inherited from my grandmother. He had no idea that I had bought the entire collection from Harrods during a weekend shopping trip to London last month, or that I had flown there in my private jet to attend a charity auction for children's literacy programs. "Spousal support?" I asked, keeping my voice level and calm. "You think I need spousal support?" Marcus had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but his resolve didn't waver. "Patricia, let's be realistic. You work part-time at a non-profit. I'm a senior executive at Meridian Industries. I make 6 figures. You make, what, 30,000 a year? Maybe 40. You'll need help transitioning to single life." I nodded thoughtfully, as if his words made perfect sense. "You're right, Marcus. 42,000 to be exact. Before taxes. See, my lawyer says 18 months of spousal support should be sufficient. $1,500 a month. That's generous, considering." "Considering what?" Marcus shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with this part of the conversation. "Considering that we don't have children, and considering that your career choices have been, well, let's call them idealistic rather than practical." My career choice was serving as executive director of the Carter Foundation for Children's Education, a non-profit that provided scholarships and educational resources to underprivileged kids throughout Georgia. It was meaningful work that I was passionate about, even if the salary was modest by Marcus's standards. What Marcus didn't know was that I wasn't just the executive director of the Carter Foundation. I was also its founder and primary benefactor. The foundation's $50 million endowment had come entirely from my personal wealth, carefully funneled through a complex network of holding companies and trusts that kept my name off any public documentation. "I see," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "And what about you, Marcus? How do you see your post-divorce life?" His uncomfortable expression transformed into something approaching excitement. "Well, I've been thinking about that. With my salary and the equity from the house, I should be able to upgrade my lifestyle significantly. Maybe get that condo downtown I've been looking at. Join the country club. Start dating women who understand success. Women who understand success." I almost laughed out loud. Marcus had been dropping hints about my limitations for months now, suggesting that I was holding him back socially and professionally. He wanted a wife who could impress his colleagues, someone who wore designer clothes to charity galas and understood the difference between a good wine and a great one. If only he knew. My name is Patricia Carter, and I had been living the most elaborate lie of my adult life for 30 years. Not because I was ashamed of my wealth, but because I had learned early in our marriage that Marcus loved the idea of being my financial savior more than he loved me as a person. The money had come from my grandfather, Benjamin Carter, who had built a construction empire throughout the Southeast during the post-war economic boom. When he died in 1993, he left everything to me. His only grandchild, the daughter of his son who had died too young in Vietnam, fighting a war that had claimed so many young men of his generation. Benjamin Carter had been a legend in Georgia business circles, a man who had started with nothing and built Carter Construction into one of the largest commercial building companies in the Southeast. By the time of his death, his empire included not just the construction business, but real estate holdings throughout Atlanta, Charleston, and Nashville, stock portfolios that had been carefully managed for decades, and business interests that generated passive income from dozens of different sources. I was 25 when the lawyers first explained the scope of my inheritance, sitting in their mahogany-paneled offices in downtown Atlanta, while they discussed trust funds and investment strategies with the casual efficiency of people accustomed to managing other people's fortunes. The number they eventually shared with me was so large it didn't feel real. $47 million in liquid assets, plus real estate and business interests valued at another $38 million, all of it generating returns that averaged 12% annually through careful investment management. I had been dating Marcus for 8 months when the inheritance became official. He was handsome, charming, and ambitious in the way that young men from middle-class families often are when they're trying to build something larger than what their parents achieved. He worked in corporate sales at a mid-sized technology company, made a decent living of about $50,000 a year, and talked constantly about his plans for success and the luxurious life he would someday provide for his wife. I fell in love with his ambition, his confidence, his absolute certainty that he could create a beautiful future for both of us. I also fell in love with the way he took care of me, paying for dinners he couldn't quite afford, insisting on driving his aging BMW instead of letting me take the bus, opening doors and carrying packages, and generally treating me like someone precious who needed protection. Marcus came from a family where men were providers and women were protected. His father had worked 2 jobs to put him through college, and his mother had sacrificed her own career ambitions to support the family. He had grown up believing that a man's value was measured by his ability to take care of the people he loved, and that a successful relationship was one where the husband could provide comfort, security, and luxury for his wife. When I finally told him about the inheritance, Marcus's reaction taught me everything I needed to know about our relationship dynamics. He didn't congratulate me or express happiness about my good fortune. Instead, he became distant and moody, making comments about trust fund babies and people who hadn't earned their money. He questioned whether I would still value hard work and financial responsibility. He worried aloud about whether I would respect him as a provider and a man. "I want to be the one who takes care of you," he said during one particularly painful conversation. "I want to be the man who builds our life together. If you already have everything you need, what's left for me to do?" The conversation took place in my small apartment near Emory University, where I was finishing my master's degree in nonprofit administration. Marcus sat on my second-hand sofa, his head in his hands, looking like a man who had lost something precious. "I've been planning our future," he continued. "I've been working extra hours, saving money, thinking about the house we'll buy and the vacations we'll take and the family we'll build together. All of that was based on the idea that we would create something together, that I would be your partner and provider." I loved him enough to understand what he was really saying. His masculine identity was tied to being a provider, and my wealth threatened his sense of purpose in our relationship. "But we can still create something together," I said, sitting beside him and taking his hand. "Money doesn't change how I feel about you or what I want our relationship to be." "It changes everything," Marcus replied. "If you're already rich, then nothing I do matters. My career, my ambitions, my ability to provide for you. None of it means anything if you already have more money than I'll ever make." "That's not true." "It is true, Patricia. You'll never need me. You'll never depend on me. You'll never look at me with gratitude when I can afford to buy you something nice or take you somewhere special. You'll always be doing me the favor of being with me, not the other way around." The pain in his voice was so genuine that it broke my heart. I realized that Marcus's love language was providing, and my wealth made it impossible for him to speak that language in our relationship. So I made a decision that seemed romantic at the time but would slowly poison our marriage over 3 decades. I decided to hide the money. "What if," I said carefully, "the inheritance was smaller than we thought?" Marcus looked up at me with hope in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if there were legal complications? What if most of the money was tied up in probate disputes or business obligations? What if we couldn't count on it being available for years, maybe decades?" I could see Marcus processing this possibility, and I watched his shoulders relax as the burden of competing with my wealth began to lift. "How much smaller?" he asked. I had already been thinking about this. The lawyers had explained that I could structure the inheritance in multiple ways, including setting up trusts that would pay out modest amounts while preserving the principal for future generations. I could easily create a scenario where I appeared to have received a small inheritance while keeping the majority of my wealth hidden. "Small enough that we would need to build our lives on our combined earnings," I said. "Small enough that your career and your success would matter just as much as they do now." Marcus's face transformed with relief and renewed purpose. "We could do that. We could build something together from the ground up. We could live like any normal couple," I agreed. "Budget carefully, save for vacations, make decisions together about major purchases. I want to take care of you, Patricia. I want to be the man who provides for our family." "Then that's exactly what you'll be." The lie began that night, with a phone call to my lawyer explaining that I wanted to restructure the inheritance to provide a modest annual income while preserving the principal in a series of irrevocable trusts. The trusts would be managed by financial advisors who had strict instructions never to contact me directly unless there was an emergency that required my personal attention. I told Marcus that the final settlement of my grandfather's estate had been disappointing. Legal fees, business obligations, and family disputes had reduced the inheritance to about $200,000, most of which would need to remain invested to generate a small annual income of about $15,000. It was enough to supplement my non-profit salary but not enough to change our lifestyle dramatically. Marcus was sympathetic but also visibly relieved. $200,000 was a nice safety net without being overwhelming. $15,000 a year would help with vacations and emergencies without making his salary irrelevant. We could still be a normal couple building a life together through hard work and careful financial planning. The wedding planning process revealed just how committed I was to maintaining the fiction. Marcus wanted to pay for as much of the wedding as possible, even though it meant taking on debt and asking his parents for help. I could have paid for a lavish celebration without affecting my lifestyle at all, but instead I helped him plan a beautiful but modest wedding that cost about $15,000 and represented a significant financial sacrifice for both our families. We were married on a perfect October day in 1994 at a small church in Marcus's hometown, followed by a reception at a local country club that his parents had belonged to for decades. I wore a dress that cost $800 and shoes that Marcus had saved for months to buy me as his wedding gift. The flowers were simple but elegant. The band was a local group that played classic soul and Motown, and the photographer was a friend of Marcus's family who gave us a good deal. It was genuinely one of the happiest days of my life, not despite the modest budget but because of it. I loved watching Marcus beam with pride as he introduced me to relatives and family friends, loved hearing him talk about our future plans, loved feeling like we were starting our marriage as equal partners who would build something beautiful together. Our honeymoon was a 5-day trip to Savannah, carefully budgeted and planned down to the last restaurant meal. We stayed at a historic bed and breakfast, took carriage tours, wandered through the beautiful squares, and ate at small family-owned restaurants that served incredible food without breaking our budget. Marcus had researched every detail of the trip, determined to give me a romantic and memorable experience without overspending. I could have taken him to Paris, Rome, or anywhere else in the world. Instead, I fell in love with Savannah's charm and with my husband's pride in providing this perfect few days for us. The first few years of our marriage were genuinely happy. We bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a nice but not luxurious neighborhood called Virginia Highland, putting down 10% and taking on a mortgage that required careful budgeting but felt manageable with our combined incomes. Marcus made about $55,000 a year by then, and my non-profit salary was $38,000, supplemented by the $15,000 from my inheritance. We furnished the house slowly, piece by piece, shopping at estate sales and discount furniture stores, refinishing pieces we found at thrift shops, and carefully saving for months before making any major purchases. I learned to love the process of hunting for bargains and making do with what we could afford. There was something satisfying about creating a beautiful home through creativity and effort rather than simply buying the best of everything. Marcus thrived in his role as our financial leader. He managed our joint checking account, made decisions about major purchases, and took pride in providing the comfortable but careful lifestyle we maintained. He was attentive, affectionate, and genuinely happy with our partnership. He would come home from work energized by his success at the office and excited to share his plans for our future. "In 5 years," he would say over dinner, "I want to be making $75,000 a year. We can add on to the house, maybe get a new car, start thinking about kids. In 10 years," he would continue, "I want to be in management. We should be able to afford private schools if we have children, maybe take European vacations." I loved listening to these dreams and plans, loved being part of a partnership where we were working towards shared goals. Marcus was smart, hardworking, and ambitious in the best possible way. He wasn't trying to get rich quick or take shortcuts. He was building a career through competence and dedication. But maintaining the fiction of our financial situation required constant vigilance, and the deception became more complex over time. I had to account for every dollar I spent, explain every unexpected expense, and maintain the illusion that my non-profit job was our primary source of security beyond Marcus's salary. When I wanted to donate to charity, I had to do it secretly through my foundation, using shell companies and anonymous gifts to avoid any connection to our household budget. When I saw beautiful clothes or jewelry, I had to resist the impulse to buy them or find ways to acquire them without Marcus noticing. The most challenging aspect was managing my actual wealth while pretending to live paycheck to paycheck. My investments were generating more than $1 million a year in returns, but I couldn't access that money without creating a paper trail that Marcus might discover. Instead, I had to watch the accounts grow while living on less than $100,000 a year in combined income. I developed elaborate systems for hiding my wealth. I rented a safe deposit box at a bank across town where I kept jewelry, important documents, and cash that I couldn't explain. I maintained a secret post office box where my investment statements and tax documents were delivered. I hired a personal assistant who worked remotely and handled my financial affairs without ever meeting Marcus or visiting our home. Most challenging of all, I had to watch Marcus struggle with financial stress that was completely unnecessary, while pretending to share his anxiety about money. When his company downsized in 1998 and he was unemployed for 6 months, I watched him spiral into depression and self-doubt while sitting on investments that could have supported us comfortably for the rest of our lives. Marcus spent those months obsessively applying for jobs, networking with industry contacts, and taking consulting work that paid poorly but helped cover our basic expenses. "I feel like such a failure," he said one night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling. "I should be able to provide better security for you. What if I can't find another good job? What if we have to sell the house?" I held him while he shared these fears, offering comfort and encouragement while my heart broke for the unnecessary suffering he was enduring. I could have told him the truth at any point, that we would never have to worry about money, that his unemployment was an inconvenience rather than a crisis, that he could take time to find the perfect job instead of accepting the first offer that came along. But by then, the lie had become too big and too fundamental to our relationship. Telling the truth would have meant admitting that I had been deceiving him for years, that every financial decision we had made together was based on false premises, that the partnership he valued so highly was built on dishonesty. When Marcus finally found a new job that paid $68,000 a year, he was so relieved and proud that he took me out to dinner at the nicest restaurant we had ever been to, a celebration that cost almost $300 and represented a significant splurge for our budget. I watched him order wine without looking at the price, saw him relax for the first time in months, and knew that telling him the truth would destroy the sense of accomplishment he felt in providing this special evening for us. The pattern repeated itself throughout the next decade. Marcus would face some professional or financial challenge, work tirelessly to overcome it, and feel genuine pride when his efforts paid off. Each success reinforced his identity as our family's provider and deepened his satisfaction with our partnership. Meanwhile, I was building a secret life that became increasingly elaborate and time-consuming. The Carter Foundation, which had started as a way to channel my charitable giving, had grown into one of Georgia's most successful educational nonprofits. We provided scholarships to thousands of students, funded after-school programs in underserved communities, and supported innovative educational initiatives throughout the Southeast. The work was genuinely meaningful and gave me a sense of purpose that my hidden wealth couldn't provide. But running a major foundation while pretending to be the poorly paid executive director required constant creativity and careful coordination with my financial team. Board meetings had to be scheduled when Marcus was traveling for business. Major donors had to be cultivated through carefully orchestrated events that didn't appear on our household calendar. Foundation business that required my personal attention had to be disguised as work retreats or professional development conferences. I became an expert at living a double life. I would spend my days managing multimillion-dollar grants and strategic initiatives, then come home to help Marcus balance our personal checkbook and plan our modest vacation budget. I would review investment portfolios worth more than most people's lifetime earnings, then carefully calculate whether we could afford to replace our aging refrigerator. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting, but I had convinced myself that I was protecting Marcus's dignity and preserving our marriage. He was happy, successful, and proud of the life he was building for us. What was the harm in letting him continue to believe that his efforts were essential to our security? The harm became apparent gradually, as Marcus's ambitions grew and his frustration with our limitations began to surface. By our 10th anniversary, Marcus was earning almost $90,000 a year and had been promoted to regional sales manager for his company. He was successful by any reasonable measure, but his success had brought exposure to colleagues and clients who lived more luxurious lifestyles. He began making comments about the cars other executives drove, the neighborhoods where successful people lived, the vacations that people at his level took with their wives. "I saw Jim Peterson's new house last week," he said over dinner one night. "It's incredible. 4,000 square feet, swimming pool, 3-car garage. His wife doesn't even work, and they live better than we do." "They also don't have any savings," I replied, knowing that Jim Peterson was actually struggling with debt despite his impressive lifestyle. Remember what happened to the Hartmans when Dave lost his job? All that expensive furniture and the big mortgage payments, and no emergency fund. "But we could afford more than we're doing," Marcus insisted. "I'm making good money now. We could upgrade the house, get better cars, join a country club. We don't have to live like we're still newlyweds." These conversations became more frequent as Marcus's career progressed. He wasn't materialistic in a shallow way, but he had begun to see lifestyle choices as markers of professional success. Driving a luxury car wasn't about the car itself. It was about signaling to clients and colleagues that he was someone worth taking seriously. Living in an exclusive neighborhood wasn't about the house. It was about establishing social connections that could advance his career. I found myself in the impossible position of having to argue for financial restraint while sitting on more wealth than Marcus could imagine. I had to discourage spending that we could easily afford, advocate for modesty while secretly living an incredibly privileged life, and watch my husband feel limited by circumstances that were entirely fictional. "Maybe we could look at some nicer neighborhoods," I would say, trying to find compromise positions. "We don't need something huge, but we could probably afford a small upgrade." "A small upgrade isn't going to impress anyone," Marcus would reply. "Either we live like successful people or we don't. There's no point in half measures." The worst moment came during our 15th year of marriage, when Marcus was offered a promotion that would have required us to relocate to Chicago. It was a significant career opportunity. Senior Vice President of Sales, with a salary of $140,000 plus bonuses and stock options. It was exactly the kind of position he had been working toward his entire career. But Marcus turned it down because he was afraid we couldn't afford the moving expenses and the higher cost of living. "The job is perfect," he explained to me over a dinner of takeout Chinese food in our modest kitchen. "It's everything I've wanted professionally. But the cost of living in Chicago is 30% higher than Atlanta. Even with the salary increase, we'd be starting over financially. New house, higher property taxes, more expensive everything. We'd have to give up our savings and probably take on debt just to maintain the same lifestyle we have here." I listened to him analyze the financial implications of the move, watched him create spreadsheets comparing housing costs and living expenses, saw him make the careful calculations of a man who couldn't afford to take financial risks. All the while, I was sitting on investments that could have paid for a luxury home in Chicago's best neighborhood without affecting our monthly cash flow. "Someday," he said that night, holding me while I pretended to share his disappointment, "someday we'll have the kind of money where decisions like this won't be so hard, where we can take risks because we know we have a safety net." I cried that night, but not for the reasons Marcus thought. I cried because I was watching the man I loved make sacrifices that were completely unnecessary, limit his ambitions because of constraints that existed only in his imagination, and I was too deep into the deception to find a way out. By year 20, our marriage had developed patterns that would define the next decade. Marcus worked obsessively to climb the corporate ladder while I maintained our household and built my secret career at the foundation. He measured our success in salary increases and bonus checks. I measured it in the number of children we were able to help through our scholarship programs, the educational initiatives we funded, and the systemic changes we were able to support through strategic philanthropy. We were comfortable, stable, and increasingly disconnected from each other's inner lives. Marcus's ambition had sharpened into something harder and more ruthless over the years. Success became less about creating a beautiful life together and more about proving his worth to the world. He worked 70-hour weeks, networked constantly, and made decisions based on what would look good to his bosses rather than what would make him happy. Meanwhile, I was finding profound meaning in work that felt authentic to me, even if the salary was modest by Marcus's standards. The Carter Foundation had become one of the most effective educational nonprofits in the Southeast, and I took genuine pride in the impact we were having on children's lives. We had funded more than 10,000 scholarships, supported innovative teaching programs in dozens of school districts, and helped pass legislation that increased education funding throughout Georgia. But our different approaches to work and money were creating friction that became harder to ignore. Marcus began making pointed comments about my naive approach to money management. He questioned why I was wasting time on a job that didn't pay well when I could be using my education and intelligence in more lucrative careers. He started suggesting that I was holding us back by prioritizing meaning over income. "You have a master's degree from Emory," he would say during arguments about our budget. "You could be making twice what you earn at that nonprofit. We could have had the house we really wanted, the vacations we really deserve. But instead, we're living like we're still in our 20s. I tried to explain that the work was important to me, that making a difference mattered more than making money. But how could I tell him that money wasn't a concern for me when I had spent 20 years pretending to worry about our monthly expenses? "It's easy to say money doesn't matter when you've never had to really worry about it," Marcus would reply. "But I grew up in a family where my father worked 2 jobs just to pay the bills. I know what financial insecurity feels like, and I don't want that for us." The irony was so painful it took my breath away. Marcus was working himself to exhaustion trying to achieve financial security that I already possessed in abundance. He was sacrificing time, relationships, and personal fulfillment to build wealth that was sitting, unused and growing, in accounts he didn't know existed. By year 25, Marcus had achieved most of the professional success he had dreamed about in his younger years. He was Senior Vice President of Sales at Meridian Industries, earned a salary of $160,000 plus bonuses that often doubled his annual income, and was respected throughout the technology industry. He had built the career he had always wanted and established himself as someone who mattered in business circles. But instead of satisfaction, his success had brought a kind of restless dissatisfaction that colored everything else in our lives. He began comparing our lifestyle to his colleagues, noting that couples with similar incomes lived in bigger houses, drove more expensive cars, and took more luxurious vacations. He started pressuring me to quit the foundation and find more lucrative work so we could live up to our potential. "Look at Richard and Susan Walsh," he would say, referring to one of his business associates. "He makes about what I make, but Susan brings in another $150,000 as a marketing consultant. They just bought a house in Buckhead for $800,000. They take European vacations twice a year. That's the kind of life we should be living. Maybe they're overextended financially, I would suggest. Maybe they're building their lifestyle on debt. Or maybe they're just smarter about maximizing their earning potential. Susan didn't settle for meaningful work that pays poverty wages. She found something she's good at that also pays well. I'm good at what I do, Marcus. And it's important work. Important to who? The foundation would hire someone else if you left. But no one else is going to build wealth for our family. No one else is going to make sure we can afford the retirement we want, or help us reach the level of success we should have achieved by now. These arguments became more frequent and more bitter as Marcus's frustration grew. He felt that I was holding back our progress as a couple, limiting our potential by making choices based on emotional satisfaction rather than financial logic. He began to see my commitment to the foundation as a kind of selfishness, a luxury I could afford because his hard work provided our basic security. I'm tired of being the only one in this marriage who cares about building wealth, he said during one particularly heated argument. I'm tired of being married to someone who thinks money doesn't matter. The statement hit me like a physical blow, not because it was cruel but because it was so fundamentally wrong. I cared about money. I had spent 30 years carefully managing more money than Marcus could imagine. I understood wealth, investment strategies, market dynamics, and financial planning better than most professional advisors. But I couldn't tell him any of that without destroying the foundation of our entire relationship. Money matters, I said quietly. But it's not the only thing that matters. It matters enough that we should be making decisions that optimize our financial position. It matters enough that both partners in a marriage should contribute to building security for the future. I do contribute. I work full-time, I manage our household, I support your career. You work at a non-profit that pays you less than we spend on groceries each month. That's not contributing to our financial future, Patricia. That's pursuing a hobby while I carry the real financial responsibility for our family. By year 30, our marriage had become a careful performance on both sides. Marcus performed the role of the successful provider who deserved a more ambitious wife. I performed the role of the idealistic non-profit worker who was grateful for her husband's financial leadership. We were polite to each other, efficient in managing our household, and increasingly distant when it came to emotional intimacy. We had sex occasionally, celebrated anniversaries with nice dinners, and maintained the appearance of a stable marriage to our friends and colleagues. But we had both quietly given up on the possibility of genuine connection. Marcus saw me as someone who didn't share his values or ambitions. I saw him as someone who had become so focused on external markers of success that he had lost sight of what actually mattered in life. The final crisis began 8 months ago, when Marcus was passed over for a promotion to executive vice president that he had been expecting for 3 years. The position went to David Chen, a younger colleague whose wife, Linda, was a successful pediatric surgeon. During the uncomfortable dinner party where Marcus learned about the decision, the company president made casual comments about the importance of power couples and spouses who could contribute to the company's social capital in the community. Marcus came home from that dinner in a rage unlike anything I had seen from him before. "Do you know what Jim Morrison said to me tonight?" he demanded, pacing around our living room like a caged animal. He said that the company is looking for executives whose families reflect their commitment to success. Families who understand that image matters in business. I sat on our sofa, watching my husband unravel, and felt the ground shifting beneath our marriage. He basically said that being married to a non-profit worker is hurting my career, that I need a wife who looks successful, who can impress clients and partners at corporate events. I'm sorry, Marcus. I know how much that promotion meant to you. Sorry isn't going to fix this, Patricia. Sorry isn't going to change the fact that I'm 55 years old, and I'm never going to reach the level of success I should have achieved because my wife prioritizes her feelings over my career. That was the moment I understood that our marriage was over. Not because Marcus was cruel or abusive, but because he had become someone who could reduce 30 years of partnership to a calculation about professional advancement. Over the next 6 months, Marcus became increasingly critical of everything about my life and choices. He complained about my clothes, my hair, the car I drove, and the friends I spent time with. He made sarcastic comments about my salary and began referring to my work as my hobby. He started working even longer hours and traveling more frequently for business. He also started coming home later and later, often smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. I hired a private investigator not because I was jealous, but because I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before making any major decisions about our future. The investigator's report was thorough and unsurprising. Marcus was having an affair with Jennifer Walsh, a 34-year-old marketing executive who made $200,000 a year and drove a BMW that cost more than my annual salary. The affair had been going on for 5 months. Marcus was spending money on Jennifer that he had never spent on me. Expensive dinners at restaurants I had never heard of, weekend trips to luxury resorts, jewelry from stores that required appointments to shop. He was living the lifestyle he had always claimed to want, just not with his wife. The investigator's photos showed Marcus and Jennifer at charity galas, business dinners, and social events where successful couples networked and built professional relationships. They looked like the power couple that Marcus had always wanted to be part of. Two attractive, successful professionals who enhanced each other's careers and social status. I could have confronted him immediately, demanded an explanation, forced a crisis that might have led to counseling or reconciliation. Instead, I did something I had never done in 30 years of marriage. I started planning my exit strategy. The first step was consulting with Richard Jameson, the attorney who had been managing my family's legal affairs since my grandfather's death. Richard was one of the few people who knew the full extent of my wealth, and he was also one of Atlanta's most respected divorce attorneys. "Patricia," he said during our confidential meeting at his downtown office, "I have to ask why you've waited 30 years to have this conversation. Because I hoped I would never need to have it. And now my husband is having an affair with a woman who represents everything he wishes I was. He's going to ask for a divorce, and when he does, he's going to discover that our financial situation is quite different from what he's been led to believe." Richard leaned back in his leather chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "How different? Different enough that he'll need new legal representation. Different enough that the spousal support calculation will be rather surprising." We spent the next 2 hours reviewing my assets, discussing legal strategies, and preparing for various scenarios that might emerge from divorce proceedings. Richard's team would handle the complex task of documenting my wealth while protecting my privacy and maintaining the secrecy I had preserved for 3 decades. "One question, Patricia," Richard said as our meeting concluded. "Do you think there's any chance Marcus will want to reconcile when he learns about your financial situation?" "I think Marcus will want to reconcile for exactly the wrong reasons," I replied. "And by then it will be too late." The confrontation I had been expecting came on a rainy Thursday evening in March. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Marcus walked in with the expression of a man who had made a difficult decision and was committed to seeing it through. "Patricia, we need to talk." I turned off the stove and faced him. "All right. I think you know what this is about." "I think I do, but why don't you tell me?" Marcus took a deep breath, clearly having rehearsed this conversation. "I want a divorce." "I see. Can I ask why?" "Because we've grown into different people who want different things from life. Because I need a partner who shares my ambitions and supports my career. Because we're both settling for less than we deserve." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "And Jennifer? Is she part of this decision?" Marcus had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter how I know. The question is whether you're leaving me for her or whether you're leaving me and she happens to be available. It's not that simple. Actually, it is exactly that simple, Marcus. You've found someone who makes more money and looks more successful, and you've decided that's what you want in a wife. Jennifer understands the importance of building wealth together. She understands that image matters in business. She's ambitious in the same way I am. She's everything I'm not. She's everything you chose not to be, yes. The conversation was happening exactly as I had expected it would, but the reality of it still hurt. After 30 years of marriage, Marcus was ending our relationship with the emotional warmth of a business transaction. So what happens now? Yes. I've already consulted with an attorney. We'll file for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. I'm prepared to be fair about the financial arrangements. You'll get half of our assets, plus reasonable spousal support while you transition to single life. How reasonable? $1,500 a month for 18 months. That should give you time to find higher paying work or make other arrangements. I almost laughed at the irony. Marcus was offering me spousal support that amounted to about what I earned in investment income every few hours. That's very generous, I said. I want to do this right, Patricia. I want us to end our marriage with dignity. I appreciate that. When would you like me to move out? Marcus looked surprised by my calm reaction. You don't have to move out immediately. We can work out a timeline that makes sense for both of us. I think it would be better if you moved out, actually. What? This is my grandfather's house, Marcus. I think I should be the one to stay. Marcus frowned. What do you mean, your grandfather's house? I mean that the deed to this property is in my name, has always been in my name, and will remain in my name after our divorce. But we bought this house together. We both signed the mortgage documents. You signed mortgage documents, yes. But if you check the actual deed, you'll find that the house was purchased entirely with funds from my inheritance and titled in my name alone. The mortgage was simply a way to establish credit history and maintain the appearance of a normal purchase. Marcus stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. That's impossible. I've been making mortgage payments for 30 years. You've been making payments on a mortgage that was entirely unnecessary, yes. I paid off the actual loan balance about 20 years ago, but I continued to let you make payments to maintain the fiction that we were building equity together. Patricia, what are you talking about? What fiction? And that's when I realized it was time to stop pretending. I walked over to the kitchen drawer where I kept important documents and pulled out a folder I had prepared weeks ago, anticipating this exact moment. Inside were account statements, investment summaries, and legal documents that told the true story of our financial situation. The fiction that we've been living paycheck to paycheck for 30 years, I said, placing the folder on the kitchen counter between us. The fiction that your salary was essential to our security. The fiction that I've been a poorly paid non-profit worker who needed your financial support. Marcus looked at the folder as if it might contain something dangerous. What are you talking about? I'm talking about $85 million in net worth, Marcus. I'm talking about investments that generate more annual income than you've earned in your entire career. I'm talking about the fact that I've been pretending to be poor for 30 years when I'm actually wealthier than anyone you've ever met. The silence in the kitchen was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming and the distant sound of our neighbor's television through the walls. Marcus opened the folder with the cautious movements of someone defusing a bomb. His face went white as he scanned the first page of account statements. This has to be fake. Some kind of mistake. It's not fake, Marcus. And it's not a mistake. I've been rich our entire marriage. Rich enough that your salary, while impressive by normal standards, represents less than 1% of our actual household income. Marcus sank into one of our kitchen chairs, still staring at the documents. I don't understand. Why would you? How could you? I hid the money because 30 years ago, you made it clear that my wealth would threaten your identity as a provider. You wanted to be the man who built our life together, so I let you think you were. But we've struggled. We've made sacrifices. You watched me stress about money, worry about our future. I watched you stress about money that we didn't actually need while sitting on investments that could have eliminated every financial concern you've ever had. Marcus looked up at me with an expression of betrayal so profound it was almost physical. You let me turn down that promotion in Chicago because we couldn't afford the move? Yes. You let me work 70-hour weeks trying to maximize my earnings. Yes. You let my mother die in a public hospital instead of getting the best medical care available because we couldn't afford private treatment. Yes. Each admission hit him like a separate blow, and I watched 30 years of perceived reality crumble in real time. Patricia, how could you do this? How could you lie to me for 30 years? The same way you've been lying to me for 5 months about Jennifer Walsh. The comparison seemed to shock him back to the present situation. That's completely different. Is it? We've both been living double lives, Marcus. The only difference is that my deception was designed to protect your feelings, and yours was designed to replace me. Marcus stood up and began pacing around the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. I need to understand this. You've been secretly rich our entire marriage. Yes. And you never told me because you made it clear that you needed to be our financial leader. Because your masculine identity was tied to providing for me. Because I thought I was being loving by letting you feel needed. By lying to me. By protecting your ego, yes. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at me with something approaching fury. My ego. You think this was about my ego? What else would you call it? You told me repeatedly that you wanted to be the one to build our life together. You said that my money would take away your purpose in our relationship. I was 26 years old. I didn't know what I was talking about. But you never changed your mind. For 30 years, you've defined your worth as a husband by your ability to provide financially. Even now, even during this divorce conversation, you're explaining to me how you make 6 figures while I make 40,000, as if that difference defines our relative value as human beings. Marcus sat back down heavily, as if his legs wouldn't support him anymore. So what happens now? Now we get divorced just like you wanted. But the financial arrangements are going to be quite different from what you had in mind. I opened another folder and placed a different set of documents on the table. These are the real assets we'll be dividing. The house we live in. I own it outright, purchased with cash in 1994. The investment account you think contains our life savings. Contains about 3% of my actual liquid assets. Your retirement fund from Meridian Industries. It's nice, but it's not going to provide the lifestyle you've been planning with Jennifer. Marcus stared at the documents, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like panic. According to Georgia law, I continued, you're entitled to half of the assets accumulated during our marriage. But since I brought the vast majority of our wealth into the marriage and kept it in accounts that predate our union, your share is going to be considerably smaller than you anticipated. How much smaller? Your half of our actual marital assets comes to approximately $600,000. Plus your retirement account and whatever you've saved independently, of course. The number seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. 600,000. That's it. That's it. Though I should mention that the spousal support arrangement you proposed is unnecessary. Given my actual income, which includes investment returns and dividends, I make approximately 50 times your salary. If anyone should be paying spousal support, it should be me. Marcus looked at me as if I were a stranger. Who are you? I don't even recognize the person sitting across from me. I'm the same person I've always been, Marcus. I'm just not pretending to be poor anymore. But why now? Why tell me the truth now? I considered the question carefully. Because you've spent the last 8 months making it clear that you're ashamed of the life we built together. You want a wife who can impress your colleagues, someone whose success reflects well on your own achievements. You're leaving me for a woman who makes more money because you think that will elevate your status. That's not. It is exactly what's happening, Marcus. And ironically, you're leaving the wealthiest woman you've ever known to be with someone who makes a fraction of what I actually earn. The kitchen fell silent again. Marcus sat with his head in his hands, and I could practically hear the sound of his worldview reshaping itself around this new information. What about Jennifer? He asked finally. What about her? Does she know about your money? No one knows except my financial advisors and now you. And I intend to keep it that way. Marcus looked up at me with something that might have been hope. So we could. If I called off the divorce, we could start over. We could build the kind of life I always wanted for us. I had been expecting this moment, had prepared for the possibility that learning about my wealth might make Marcus want to reconcile. The sad truth was that 30 years of deception had killed my love for him as surely as his affair had killed his commitment to our marriage. No, Marcus. We can't start over. But why not? Everything changes now. We could travel, buy a bigger house, join the country club. We could have the lifestyle that matches your actual financial status. And then what? You'd be happy being supported by your wife's inherited wealth. You'd be comfortable being the husband who contributes $200,000 a year to a household with a $12 million annual income. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Maybe. We could figure it out. We had 30 years to figure it out, and instead we built a marriage based on lies and pretense. I lied about my money, and you lied about being satisfied with our life. We've been performing our relationship instead of living it. But the money changes everything. The money changes nothing about the fundamental problems in our relationship. You still want a wife who makes you look successful to other people. I still want a partner who values me for who I am rather than what I can provide. The only difference is that now you know I can provide a lot more than you realized. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where we had hosted barbecues and birthday parties and all the ordinary celebrations of a 30-year marriage. I made mistakes, Patricia. I know that. The affair was wrong and I'm sorry. But don't you think I deserve a chance to make this right? You deserve a chance to be happy, Marcus. But I don't think you can be happy being married to someone wealthier and more successful than you are. Your identity is too tied up in being the provider, the leader, the one who builds our life together. Maybe I could change. Maybe you could. But I don't want to spend the next 30 years finding out. I walked over to stand beside him at the window. We had a good marriage for a while, Marcus. We loved each other genuinely, even if we built that love on false pretenses. But we've grown into people who want different things from life, and that's nobody's fault. So you really want the divorce to proceed? I really do. Marcus nodded slowly, as if he were finally accepting a reality he had been fighting. What happens to Jennifer? That's between you and Jennifer. Though you might want to consider whether she'll be as interested in dating a middle manager with $600,000 as she was in dating someone she thought was a senior executive with unlimited potential. Marcus winced, apparently having the same thought. You think she's with me for my money? I think she's with you for the lifestyle you can provide and the status you represent. But when word gets out about our divorce, and it will get out, especially when your lifestyle changes, she'll have to decide whether she wants the man or the financial security she thought came with him. That's harsh. It's realistic. You chose her based on what she could do for your career and your image. Why wouldn't she choose you based on similar calculations? We stood together at the window, two people who had shared 3 decades of life and were about to become strangers again. Patricia, Marcus said finally, I'm sorry. Not just about Jennifer but about all of it. About making you feel like you had to hide who you were. About prioritizing my career over our relationship. About becoming someone you couldn't love anymore. I'm sorry too, Marcus. I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to tell you the truth. I'm sorry I let you make sacrifices that were completely unnecessary. I'm sorry we couldn't find a way to grow together instead of growing apart. Do you think we ever had a real marriage? Or was it all just performance and pretense? I considered the question seriously. I think we had a real marriage for the first 15 years. Maybe 20. After that, we were both playing roles instead of being ourselves. I did love you, you know. I still do in a way. I know. I loved you too. But love isn't always enough to overcome fundamental incompatibilities. Marcus picked up the divorce papers from the kitchen counter. So these terms will need to be revised significantly, yes. I'll have my attorney contact yours with the correct financial information. Your attorney. I smiled for the first time since this conversation began. Marcus, I'm about to become one of Atlanta's most eligible wealthy divorcees. Course I have an attorney. Several, actually. Who? Richard Jameson. Marcus's face went white again. The Richard Jameson. The one I'm paying to represent me. The same. Though obviously he'll be withdrawing from your case due to the conflict of interest. I'm sure he'll recommend excellent alternative counsel. You planned this. All of it. I planned for the possibility that you would eventually want a divorce, yes. I've been preparing for this conversation for years. Marcus shook his head in amazement. 30 years, and I never really knew you at all. You knew the version of me I thought you wanted to see. Just like I knew the version of you that you thought I wanted to see. And now we both get to be ourselves. You can pursue the lifestyle and the kind of wife you actually want. I can stop pretending to worry about money and start being honest about who I really am. The divorce proceedings took 6 months to finalize, and the local business community buzzed with speculation about the settlement terms. When the paperwork became public record, Marcus's colleagues were shocked to discover that Patricia Carter, the quiet non-profit worker they had dismissed as an impediment to Marcus's success, had quietly been one of Georgia's wealthiest individuals for decades. Marcus moved in with Jennifer immediately after our separation, but the relationship didn't survive the reality of his changed financial circumstances. When Jennifer realized that Marcus's share of our divorce settlement was far less than she had expected, and that his career prospects had been damaged by the public revelation of his wife's wealth, she ended their relationship within 3 months. Marcus found himself single, financially comfortable but not wealthy, and facing the challenge of rebuilding his professional reputation in a business community that now saw him as the man who had been foolish enough to divorce one of the region's most successful philanthropists. As for me, I kept the house in Virginia Highland but bought a beautiful estate in Buckhead where I could entertain properly and host foundation events without worrying about maintaining false pretenses. I hired an excellent staff, bought beautiful clothes, and began traveling to the places I had always wanted to see but couldn't visit without arousing Marcus's suspicion. Most importantly, I came out of hiding at the Carter Foundation. I publicly acknowledged my role as the organization's founder and primary benefactor, which allowed me to be more strategic about our grant-making and more effective in building partnerships with other philanthropic organizations. The foundation's work expanded dramatically once I could operate openly. We launched initiatives in 5 new states, partnered with major universities on educational research, and began influencing policy at the national level. Having my name publicly associated with the work opened doors that had been closed when I was operating as an anonymous donor. 6 months after the divorce was final, I ran into Marcus at a charity gala downtown. He looked older, more tired, and he was attending alone. I was there with Dr. Michael Harrison, the foundation's medical advisor, who had finally asked me to dinner after learning that I was divorced. "Patricia," Marcus said when he approached our table during the cocktail hour, "you look incredible." I was wearing a designer gown that cost more than his monthly salary, and I felt more confident and attractive than I had in years. "Thank you, Marcus. You look well too. I wanted to tell you the Foundation's new initiatives are really impressive. The scholarship program expansion, the teacher training institutes. It's incredible what you've been able to accomplish. It's incredibly what we've been able to accomplish once I could work openly instead of hiding behind shell companies and anonymous donations." Marcus winced slightly at the reference to our old deception. "I hope you know that I'm proud of you. I always was, even when I was too stupid to appreciate what I had. I hope you're building the kind of life you want, Marcus. I'm trying to. It's different than I expected it would be." "Different how?" "Different because I realized that what I thought I wanted wasn't actually what would make me happy. And by the time I figured that out, it was too late to fix the damage I had done." I felt genuine sympathy for him in that moment. Marcus wasn't a bad man. He had simply gotten lost in ambitions and insecurities that had gradually poisoned our relationship. It's not too late to build something meaningful, Marcus. You're still relatively young, still successful, still capable of finding someone who will love you for who you are rather than what you can provide. Someone like Jennifer. Someone completely unlike Jennifer. Someone who values kindness over status. Someone who would be impressed by your work ethic and integrity rather than your bank account balance. Marcus smiled sadly. Someone like the woman I was married to, but was too blind to appreciate. Someone like that, yes. But not me, Marcus. We had our time, and it was good while it lasted, but we're different people now. I know. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I threw away. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry too, Marcus. For all of it. We talked for a few more minutes about mutual friends and his work, and then he returned to his table. I watched him sit alone, checking his phone periodically, and felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Michael took my hand across the table. "Are you all right?" "I'm perfect," I said, and meant it completely. That was 2 years ago. Michael and I were married last spring in a beautiful ceremony at the Botanical Garden, surrounded by friends from the foundation and colleagues from his medical practice. It was the wedding I had always dreamed of. Elegant but not ostentatious, meaningful but not overly serious, a celebration of genuine love and partnership. Marcus sent a congratulatory card, which I thought was a nice gesture. He had found someone new, a school principal named Sarah who shared his values and appreciated his steady reliability. They seemed happy together in a quiet, authentic way that reminded me of how Marcus and I had been in our early years together. Today, I'm sitting in my home office, reviewing grant applications and planning the foundation's expansion into early childhood education. The irony is that I'm working harder now than I ever did when I was pretending to be poor, but the work feels completely different because I can be honest about who I am and what I'm trying to accomplish. I still think about the 30 years I spent living a lie, and I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had told Marcus the truth from the beginning. Would he have been able to handle being married to someone wealthier than he was? Would we have found a way to build a genuine partnership based on honesty instead of pretense? I'll never know the answer to those questions. But I do know that authenticity, even when it's difficult, is always preferable to deception, even when it's well-intentioned. I learned that truth is the foundation of every meaningful relationship, and that love built on false pretenses is ultimately no love at all. And I learned that it's never too late to stop pretending to be someone you're not and start living as the person you actually are.